Welcome to Teaching Truth. There's a story that's told about a great hall in the university city of Oxford. For hundreds of years this hall has stood there. It's been held up by vast oak beams. But in the 19th century, those oak beams needed replacing. And you know what they found? They found that 500 years before, someone had thought, those beams will need replacing one day. And so in the park around where the great hall was, they had planted some oak trees. Just think about that. Centuries had passed. Columbus had reached America, gravity had been discovered, and when those oaks were needed, they were ready. It was Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990, who said this, that we are in the business of planting trees for our children and grandchildren, or we have no business being in politics at all. Now, agree or disagree as you will with the Iron Lady, but it's what the Israelites were doing in Nehemiah's day, metaphorically planting trees for their children and grandchildren, making good on that commitment, that prayer which they had prayed, living out the agreement, the covenant that they had been signatories to, not just making do and mending, but committing themselves for the long term to something better for the glory of God and the prospering of the city, God's city of Jerusalem. And in our reflections today, as we continue with our theme of getting our hands dirty, we want to consider about supplying what is needed. Because the Israelites in Nehemiah's day got their hands dirty by supplying what was needed. Let's read about that in the 10th chapter of the Nehemiah memoirs. And from verse 32. We read this, that once a year, we, that is the Israelites, will each donate a small amount of silver to the temple of our God. This is to pay for the sacred bread, as well as for the daily sacrifices and special sacrifices, such as those offered on the Sabbath and during the New Moon festival and the other festivals. It will also pay for the sacrifices to forgive our sins and for all expenses connected with the worship of God in the temple. We have decided that the families of priests, Levites, and ordinary people will supply firewood for the temple each year, so that sacrifices can be offered on the altar, just as the Lord our God has commanded. Each year we will bring to the temple the first part of our harvest of grain and fruit. We will bring our firstborn sons and the firstborn males of our herds and flocks and offer them to the priests who serve in the temple, because this is what is written in God's law. To the priests in the temple of our God, we will bring the bread dough from the first harvest, together with our best fruit, and an offering of new wine and olive oil. The people supplied for the temple what was needed. And they did that in a number of ways, two ways that we want to think about today. First of all, through the temple tax. The annual census of the people in those days, people who were 20 years and over, was accompanied by the collecting of half a shekel of tax, a bit like kind of national insurance or income tax that we would pay through our salary today, to support the ministry of the house of God. And that tax was a reminder to the people that God had redeemed them and paid a price to set them free. And that was very, very important. The original tax was used to make silver sockets and hooks for the tabernacle of old, but now it is being used for the new tabernacle, the temple of God. The temple tax is what the people gave. Nehemiah 10 verse 33 describes how the money would be spent, how the tax would be apportioned, what was needed. But it was all needed to further the work of the house of God. If the nation was to be in a right relationship with the Lord, then the priests who had been set aside had to carry on their ministry faithfully. Now, we today in 21st century culture don't have to provide animals and grain and firewood and other materials, so to speak, for the church to go on. But we have a responsibility to provide not just finances and money, but our gifts, our talents, and our abilities. We need to pay, as it were, our tax and to fulfill our obligation. There was also a wood offering that was brought. Wood was collected, firewood was obtained. And since the fire on the brazen altar that we read of in the tabernacle was to be kept burning constantly, it required a steady supply of wood. If we are to keep a fire going in our homes or on a fire pit, we need to keep feeding it with wood. And wood in those days was a precious commodity. And so people were to bring firewood. Wood was important in God's service. Not everybody in Israel could be a priest or a Levite or donate a lamb or oxen for sacrifices, but everybody could bring a bit of wood and help keep the home fires burning, as it were. The priests needed wood for the altar, and the people could provide it. Everyone was involved. The ministry of God in our local church, wherever that might be, requires our gifts, our abilities, our talents, as well as our finances. When we see a need, are we prompted in our heart and in our spirit to go and to meet that need? Whether it be paying that which is required, helping to finance ministry, or if it's even just bringing a simple piece of wood and offering that humbly to be used for the glory of God. Whether it be a shekel, whether it be money, whether it be your credit card, or whether it be a simple piece of wood or a cup of cold water, God can use everyone to help build his church. Whatever needs there are, may we be those people who, like the Israelites, stood ready to supply that which was needed for the glory of God.